Normal Saturday uploads. So today we're doing a live. This is going to be basically on us doing a coolant repair on a Buick Encore. This is a 1.4 liter engine. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time to file in while I finish setting up a few things. We'll get started once I start seeing people kind of file in. Yeah, we'll give you guys just a little bit of time to file in here, and then we'll get rolling on this topic. This is going to be a big one. Last week we did quite a bit of repairs. I'll do that breakdown right before we get into this, but just so you guys know, once we finish this project on this vehicle, it won't be back for a little while. We got a few more things to do to this thing, but it's going to be a little bit. I'm giving you guys some... Okay, so yeah. Looks like, guys, I have got a producer that works in the background. You guys are going to see this wire. This is my producer talking to me while we do these videos. So this will help me do a lot better content for you guys in the future. So if you guys missed that, I'll probably repeat that one or two more times once we're rolling, let you guys know that we are working on a lot behind the scenes here to kind of get things built up. I'm going to double check everything that I got going and make sure that we're good to go. I'm going to give you guys just a few more minutes to pile in. Basically, we start at 1, so we got a little bit of time before everyone comes in. All right, my producer Aim High is in here. Thank you guys. Yeah, like I said, we normally start at 1. We got a little bit more time here yet to kill before we start the topic. We do this every Saturday, guys, at 1 p.m. Central. So we are working on more stuff behind the scenes to bring you guys a lot better content. And as we do this, we're going to get into different topics. Right now, there is a little question on what's going on with Malibu Steel over here. I'll get into Malibu Steel a little bit later in this video, but if I don't get the answers that I need by the end of the day today, I will be ordering parts for that probably tonight or tomorrow. That'll help me kind of decide what path I'm going to go here for the future of Malibu Steel. Now again, this all depends on what happens. I'll break that down a little bit later. So again, guys, I want to thank everyone for tuning in on this Saturday live. This topic is going to be on coolant leaks. I'll cover everything in just a bit. I want to do a quick walk around, make sure I've got everything laid out for you guys. So if you got any questions, because I do now have a producer, that's what this is right here. My producer can now tell me when you guys chat in. So if you guys have a comment or a question, any of my mods, please check in ahead of time, mods. That way we can shout you guys out. I have my mods here for a reason. They're quick to respond, and they do an excellent job to also help answer your questions, especially if it's something specific that I can't look up because I'm on with you guys. My mods do a lot of the background research and even get me torque specs when I need them, when I'm in the middle of a project. So they are a great help, and I really do appreciate them here on the channel. So I'll give you guys just a little bit more time, and then we're going to go ahead and kick this off. Okay, Cannibal Rick, that is a big negative on that. Not here. No, Cannibal Rick, what we do here is automotive repair. Everything automotive repair. It's what we do. I try to show you guys helpful tricks and tips doing some of this stuff in your own driveway and being able to kind of get through it. I also help answer other people's questions, and I also do a little bit of news section towards the tail end of every one of my videos. All right, so I think we're set up, and this is what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and we'll start the topic, and we'll get rolling with everything that we got going. Just to let you guys know, you now have a producer. The producer can now answer or tell me your questions. So you guys can chat those in. Hoping to have my producer here on every video. This will help us have a better smooth flow of chats. So when it comes down to it, questions only until we get to just before the news section. Then I kind of take over the chats because we've already finished our project. Today's project is on a Buick Encore. This thing has 2 different coolant leaks. Can someone in the chat let me know if my heater is making too much noise? If it is, I'm going to go ahead and kill that off. In fact, I might shout to my producer quick. Is that making much noise? Okay, so what we're going to do, start off every video. Guys, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this content. Make sure you ring that notification bell so you guys get notified when we go live every Saturday at 1 p.m. Central. It's a new topic every week, and we take a deep dive into what's going on with some of the newer vehicles, some of the problems we run into, and sometimes I stumble upon other stuff that's wrong with vehicles during those repairs. This brings you guys more content and helps us to kind of build a better platform for you guys. If you have any topics that you wish us to cover, our email is down in our description. So feel free to email us any ideas that you guys have or chat them in down below, and my producer will write them down for the future. As long as they're within the vehicles that we have access to, I have no problem on doing videos for you guys based on specific topics that you might be running into. So, that being said, let's go ahead and get into today's topic. We are dealing with a 2017 Buick Encore with the 1.4 liter. This engine is starting to have some severe coolant leaking issues. And it's going to be the same on any 1.4. So it doesn't matter if it's in a Chevy Cruze or if it's in a Chevy Trax. Any motor that is the 1.4 liter is going to be a very similar setup. The only difference is where the coolant reservoir may be located. Now, one of the coolant leaks is on the reservoir. It's not a big deal, but it's something we're going to fix because we have to drain the coolant anyway. So why not fix it while we're there? The other big thing that you guys will need to know is where we can actually bleed out the air in the system. If we don't bleed this air out, it can get trapped and overheat part of the pockets of the head gasket, burning out the head gasket. We don't want to do a head gasket on this car because it's really not worth it for how many miles are on the car. It's better to make sure we do this repair right and get that air out of the coolant system. We're also going to turn on our heat and let our defrost run on full blast when we're putting this back together and we've got all the coolant sealed up. The reason for that is we can burp all the air pockets out of the heater core. We also don't want air pockets in there because if we have air pockets in our heater core, we could actually cook part of our heater core. It needs to have the coolant running through it smoothly for it to not overheat. So that will be something we will do when we get there. For now, I'm going to get you guys set up on a different setup so we can take a deeper dive look at what's going on inside this engine and what we're dealing with today. There's a lot of hoses to disconnect and there's a lot of things to take apart, and I'll show you guys how to take the shields off underneath to be able to drain the radiator. Now these don't hold much coolant. I was surprised and how little coolant I got out of this vehicle. It's only about a half a gallon is all I got out of it. So when we go back together, I'm going to need to put at least a half a gallon back into this. I do know there was leaks, so I do know I'm probably going to have to put a little bit more than a half a gallon, but I definitely want to have at least that go back into it. So it's a good benchmark test. We'll cover that when we get down below and I show you guys where we drained it from and what we had to take apart to get access to actually drain this radiator. Let me set you guys up on a different tripod. Okay, Cannibal Rick, you said you can hear the heater. Okay, so what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to go ahead and click that heater off now that it's done. I'm setting you guys up on a different setup here. So I'm going to go ahead and just click my heater off for now. Well, while we're here, why don't I cover what's going on with Malibu Steel quick? Malibu Steel had a deer hit on the right side. It cracked the bumper cover and did a little bit of damage to the plastics underneath. Nothing super crazy. Actually, for deer hits goes, this is probably one of the lightest I've ever seen. The weird thing is how I hit it. It twisted and rotated up and bounced off my windshield. So it could have been a lot worse. It could have blown out the windshield, could have wrecked the pillar, the door, could have totaled out the hood. None of that happened, so I got very lucky. What's going on with it is we are considering selling this thing. And when we do, I need to know, am I fixing it to sell it to somebody? Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to get this tripod to work here properly. So what I need to know is, am I fixing it to sell it to somebody, or am I just selling it to somebody that I know that doesn't care if it's fixed or not? Waiting until this afternoon, late this afternoon, and I will get that answer. If they don't want it, I'm going to go ahead and invest the money to order a new bumper cover online, one that's pre-painted, which will be a lot better for us because it's just a direct bolt-on. I don't have to worry about paint work. That will put that car back together without having any signs of the deer hit. That will be a very good video for you guys, especially if you ever have a situation where you do have minor damage like that. You guys will understand how you can get simple repairs like that fixed really easily. It does make a huge difference when you sell a car that looks good. So if you're trying to sell a car that's all busted up and falling apart, you're not going to get as much money for it. When you get one that's nice, clean, everything works, everything functions like it's supposed to, you'll get more money for that car. So that's why we would be putting the bumper cover together. The only reason I won't fix it is if I'm selling it to somebody that I know that doesn't care if it's fixed. If they don't care that it's fixed, then I'll be willing to sell the car and move on with it. The reason for us selling that car is I've taken a job that's closer to my house for my daily job that I do. As you guys know, YouTube is not my daily job. I don't do this for a living. And I also don't take sponsors because I don't want to deal with the hassle of having to do a review on something that I don't necessarily approve. When people take sponsorships, they have to talk favorably about that sponsor because the sponsor's paying them for that video. I don't like that. I never have liked that. I like to be able to speak openly and honest about products that I use. That's why I bought the Quick Trick alignment tools myself. I didn't try to do a sponsorship on that because if they didn't work, I wanted to be able to say, hey, you guys messed this up. It doesn't work. We're not doing this. And honestly, it didn't work for Crimson Vortec. When I took it in for the alignment, it was way off. So that being said, I wouldn't recommend their database for their information. Some of their tools work great. I like the turntables for the wheels. I like the setup for doing toe in and toe out. It's a really good setup that's very accurate and very simple to use. But beyond that, you can't really set the cast and camber with their tools. So a little bit of a downfall there. And as I said in that video, you can't do toe in and toe out until you've done cast or camber. Your caster has to be first, camber has to be next, and then your toe in, toe out. If you do it backwards, you'll wind up having to redo everything. It has to go in that order in order to get your alignment straight. Let's go ahead and dive into this car. I'm going to show you guys where we're at and what we got going on. Make sure you guys hit that like button, and make sure you guys subscribe so you guys get notified when I go live. Okay, so here we are. This is what we've got. So our coolant reservoir, this is cracked. I could break this off with my finger right now. I'm trying not to because I do want to keep this around worst case scenario. If we ever had another one that cracked down here, this would work as a good temporary. So I don't want to bust this up anymore. This hose was connected to here and went down here. This is our main leak, and we're leaking right out of a seal right here. You can't really replace these seals. This is a one-piece unit. We are upgrading it to an all aluminum. Now we could replace the seal in here because the aluminum will not heat soak like the plastic will. When the plastic heat soaks, it'll crack real easy. We can have a lot of damage here. This is a very, very delicate part of this engine. And this is the thermostat housing. So when you guys are looking this up and you're getting this, you'll be asking for that thermostat housing. There's 3 bolts that hold that on. We've got a hose here, a main feed hose here that goes to our radiator. We have another coolant hose back here. That one we will have to take off. But I should be able to snake this up to here because we do want to trim the hoses. And the reason we trim hoses is when they're long enough like this, from sitting on here, what can happen is this starts to depress and becomes indented to where this clamp will not hold tight. And if this clamp doesn't hold tight, it'll leak out of these hoses. So old hoses, we have to trim them off as long as the hose is long enough for us to trim them and then pull them up to where we need them for them to fit onto this piece. So yes, this one has already been trimmed, and I don't think I even have that piece. I think I threw it already because there was no point in me hanging on to it. But we're going to trim, more than likely we're going to possibly trim this one down as long as I can pull this to the new housing. I definitely want to trim that one back there because that one is going to be really hard to access once this is all back together. This hose here is our main feed hose that comes up from our intercooler because this is a turbocharged car. And the other thing that you need to know is if you have a bunch of oil in here, you have to question what shape the turbo is on the car. You might have oil getting sucked into the turbo from the turbo going bad. And I did wipe out a bunch of oil out of here. So I'm going to be putting this back together. We're going to test this, see how it is. And if I have a bunch of oil in there yet again, then I'm going to look into what's causing that so that we can figure out a plan for the future for this customer. Again, turbos on these cars are really small, very tiny. In fact, the turbo lives right over here. And it wouldn't be horrible to replace. It looks like it's pretty easy to get to. But again, turbos are a pain. I don't like them for a few reasons. You can have issues with the turbo going bad, and it could do some damage to the motor, especially if the guts blow out and go through the intercooler, and they could get sucked in by the engine and damage the engine. So turbos have a downside, and paying attention to the warning signs on a turbo is even more important because when they do start going bad, they usually give you a warning. That warning is usually the sign of an oil being spit into the system like we noticed there. Now, we also did the valve cover last week, so I'm going to go ahead and break this valve cover setup down that we did last week quick, and then we're going to tear into what's left to take apart, and I'll show you guys the new piece going in. So the valve cover, what we did is we pulled the old stock plastic valve cover off. The reason we did this is we were getting a emission code that was related to the valve cover because part of the EGR system goes right through here. That EGR system was sucking oil into it, which could have caused our oil to wind up in there. So that's why I'm not jumping to conclusions here with this. But when we did that, we put a new coil pack on it, put all new spark plugs in it, retorqued everything properly, including the valve cover, and we reconnected this connector that was not properly fastened. If this connection comes loose, then you're going to have a misfire. That misfire is going to mess with the engine. So when we went through and did all this, I took it for a test drive and it came out awesome. No problems whatsoever. Everything worked perfect on this repair. So this one was just basically valve cover, spark plugs, coil pack. And we don't have any oil leaks. Everything runs perfect. That was only stage 1 of this repair. Stage 2 turned into this coolant leak issue that we're about to dive into now. So that's why we're doing this. What we need to know is we are going to need to remove this out of the radiator. And we need to do that before we drain the coolant. It is located right up underneath there. Very hard to see. This you will need out not only to drain the radiator, but also when you refill it. This is important because this will allow the air to get out of the engine and the radiator so that you don't have issues in there. Let's go ahead and look down below and we'll talk about what we have going on here. Okay, so you guys see the jug with the hose. This is draining the coolant right now into this jug, and we've drained about 3 quarts out of this jug, or into this jug from the radiator. That's probably all we're going to get out of this, so I'm going to go ahead and close this up, and we could actually put this cover back on, but part of the reason I'm doing this is I wanted to show you guys where this was located. I need to get a gimbal for this thing. Sorry about the shakiness, guys. That's another thing we'll look into for the future here. So right here is where our drain plug is. So I've twisted this out a ways. I'm going to go ahead and tighten this up now. And I did this by hand. It came out by hand, so I'm going to put it back in by hand. And I just go until it goes tight. I don't try to crank on it or anything. Then I'll disconnect my hose and I can set this jug out of the way so I don't tip it over. So that's where it's located, but to access it, we have to move this shield. This shield is held on by 10 millimeters and 7 millimeters. So we'll need our 7 millimeter ratchet, or 7 millimeter socket and 10 millimeter socket on our ratchet. And this, there's a clip right here. I'm going to slide you guys back so you can see it. This clip here is where it clips into the front of the bumper. So you have to kind of pull the front of the bumper back, shove this shield back to clip this in. So just like that, it slides in. Now what I like to do is I like to start the bolts on the outer side of my setup. So I like to do the outer ones first and line those up. And then I'll work towards the center. And the reason for that is if you start in the center here, what can happen is by the time you get to the other end, it's too tight and you won't be able to tighten these up. So I'm going to grab the sockets that I need and I'll be right back down there with you guys. All right. So I'm going to start by tightening this one over here, and then I'll slide you guys back and we'll do the other side. Make sure you guys hit that like and subscribe button, ring the notification bell. We do this every Saturday at 1 p.m. Central. So, again, we want to make sure we're tucked up into that bracket where it belongs. And then we just run this down. Okay, now we'll slide back and we'll do the other side. So we want to move make sure you guys are in the center of the shot there so you guys can see this, because again, any mods in the chat, make sure you guys check in. I always like to know when my mods are in. So now I'm just going to go along here. So just lining these up. So you might be asking, why are we just putting this shield back on, considering we haven't done everything up top? Because once we empty the radiator, there's no reason for us to leave this open any longer. There's nothing we can access underneath here. So it really doesn't pay to leave this undone like that. Plus, I don't want to knock that coolant all over the floor. So it's better for me to just go ahead and put this all back together down here, and then we move on to the next task. So next we have some bolts here. I'm trying to keep you guys in the center shot. These bolts go underneath here, and they're more of the support bolts for the bracketry on this splash shield. If you don't put this in, the wind will shake this and break these. That's the reason that these were added, because these are the main support bolts for this bottom shield. These small little 7 millimeters do not hold anything. Most of the weight that's being held is right here off of these 10 millimeters that live underneath here. And we want to make sure that these are tight, because these are holding the shields pretty much together. There's 2-piece shields underneath here. So we have a front shield and then an over the motor shield. Sometimes, depending on oil changes and how hard they are to get to, this one's not so bad. They got a decent cutout for the oil pan, and the filter on this one is actually on top, so we don't have to remove any access covers. For the longest time, GM always had access covers underneath their stuff for removing oil filters, but a lot of that has gone away with what I call oil bath filters. Oil bath filters are not the greatest setup because they don't filter oil under pressure. So they more or less only filter by just bathing in the oil that's put up there. there is no pressurized oil in those filters. And that has been a long debated topic, whether that's a good setup or a bad setup. Me personally, I think it's a bad setup because it doesn't do a proper job of filtrating all the oil that runs through the engine. And the only way that you would have that is if you change the filter setup so that it was coming straight from the oil pump, pushing through the filter, and then circulating it through the engine. It's a setup that race cars use quite often. Some of them also use a remote filter setup, but they're all pressurized filters so that they could save an engine rather than letting it burn down. I'll talk about that once we get up top a little bit, I guess. Okay, so what was I talking about with the filters? Well, let's keep it simple, shall we? This one has what I call an oil bath filter. Down here, we would undo that cap that you see right there. The filter is clipped onto the cap. All it does is just bathe in the oil. It's not pressurized, so it doesn't really do that great of a job of filtration when it comes to keeping contaminants out of the engine. We are starting to see on a lot more newer engines, a lot more carbon buildup in the engine. Why is this happening? Because our oil filter is not filtering out some of those contaminants, and they're getting flushed around the engine, causing engine contamination buildup. How we're fixing it currently, and it may not be the best way because we have to watch what it does to our bearings, but what it does is we run an engine oil flush. This goes through, removes a layer of that buildup or contamination inside the engine, and you just let it drain out down through the oil pan when you change your oil. It's not something you can run while you're driving the vehicle normally. This oil flush can only be done right before you drop the oil to change it. And how you have to do it is the engine has to be warm. You have to add the flush, let the vehicle idle for 20 minutes, shut it off, drain the hot oil. This is where it gets to be tricky. That hot oil, if you're not careful, will burn you because most of the time it's over 200 degrees. And oil will burn into your skin if you're not wearing good enough gloves. So we don't like doing the oil flushes, but right now sadly, it's the best option we have to answering the issue with these filter systems. Unfortunately, it is the unfortunate setups that we deal with because of manufacturer design. So I want to get you guys in a good spot here to see this next part of this repair. What I plan on doing, guys, is I think I'm going to pull that reservoir out of the way to give me more room. So we're going to do that part next. Okay, so in order to access this, there's going to be pop clips. There's 4 of them across the back here that we need to remove so we can lift this up and access those 2 screws you guys see right here. When we remove these, we'll be able to take this tank out of the way. Once this is out of the way, we'll have a better access at that hose, and then we can take the bolts out and move that away from the engine, and then remove that last hose on the back last, which means we're going to do this in reverse when we put it back together. So how we're going to do this is we will need a 13 millimeter to remove our reservoir tank. Correction, we need a 10 millimeter. Okay, so 10 millimeter, 2 screws. That was looser than it should have been. So if you guys were here last week and you guys saw what was going on with this repair, I told you that somebody was in here working on this car prior to me getting into this car. And the reason I found that out is there was a brand new spark plug in there and the plugs were not torqued. I also noticed that the clip that held the coil pack on was loose. That means it wasn't receiving proper connection to the coil pack itself. Something really, really, really bad. We don't want that. So here's our old one. Like I said, we're going to keep this around, even though this is cracked. This could be used as a spare in an absolute emergency. The way these reservoir tanks work is it keeps a certain amount of fluid in here to feed our entire system. If this one cracks or we get a crack down below, we basically will lose all of our coolant. So this will work as a backup if we absolutely need it to, but for the most part I wouldn't, just because this is pretty cracked up and broken. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, now we can move on to what's next here. So, yeah, the next is going to be getting this main feed hose off of here. When we take the bolts loose for this housing, we want to make sure we get as many hoses off of here as we can. The reason for that is it makes our job so much more easier when we're not having to fight the hoses. Trying to find a good spot to set this tripod for you guys. Okay, I think I got a pretty good spot there that you guys can see everything that's going on. So what we did first is we removed this hose. This hose is right here. We got a brand new hose in the kit. So this one we will be replacing with the new hose. We will more than likely reuse these clips, or if the clips they gave us in the kit look in much better shape, we'll use those. I don't like using the hose clamp style old ones that we're used to seeing. Anyone who's worked on cars long enough have seen these kind of hose clamps. These work in a pinch, but here's the problem. When you live in extreme climates, like if it gets really super cold or super hot, these can leak. And I don't like using these because you have to go back in and tighten it after you've ran this the first time. So it's important to make sure that you run the proper hose clamps. Now, these are designed to stay at the right pressure no matter what the temperature of the engine is. So once it's on there and it's seated properly, we don't have to worry about this one leaking. But we do have to worry if the hose is old and this is depressed, meaning that if this is all wore out, we need to trim that hose off, slide the hose clamp back before we put it on. Some hoses let us do that. Some of these older ones might be too short, so we have to replace the hose. That's what's going on here. This one will have to be replaced on the new one, which honestly, if you guys are going to do this repair, I strongly suggest going on Amazon and picking up this upgraded piece. This is an all one-piece aluminum setup. Comes with a brand new temp sensor, and the top that you guys see here, that's all aluminum. The only thing that you have to worry about is a seal in here and a seal in here. You would have to worry about this on the plastic anyway because it's the same setup. What this does for us is allows us to replace these O-ring seals without having to swap out our metal stuff. This will last 10 times longer than that plastic junk that the factory puts on. So now we're ready to go ahead and tackle that big hose down there. I'm going to try to use this tool here because I hate breaking out the one that I normally use on these because it's temperamental to use. And sometimes it's better to just use pliers. But if it keeps sliding off like it was here for me, then I don't have a choice. Then I'm going to have to break out that tool. And we might not have enough room because the computer is in the way here. I'm starting to see that already. All right, not liking it. We're going to break out the tool. So this lovely tool is what we use to release those nasty clamps. And sometimes it works great, other times it's just a pain. So I try to do it first with pliers before I break out this. Because sometimes, like here, if it can't quite get on there because there's stuff on top of it, then I'm going to have a hard time pressing this in. Sometimes it works really good. Sometimes it does not. Okay. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and slide this off of here now. I'm going to show you guys why we have to trim those hoses. So here's our old hose clamp. We could choose to reuse this one, but it's very rusty. And this one I might choose to replace with the worm clamp that I showed you guys, because we can easily access this if I put the worm clamp in the right spot. The only reason I wouldn't reuse this one is because this one is extremely rusty and may not hold the pressure that we need it to hold. So here's what I was talking about when I said these hoses get compressed over time from the clamps. If we put that old hose clamp back on here, now that we've broken this seal, this will leak if we don't trim this section of it off and slide it onto the hose farther. In order to do that, we need to make sure we have enough hose that if we trimmed it off, we could still slide it on there. And it looks like I should be able to pull this one onto there. So I can at least trim half of this off, which would allow me to have a good section here to actually put the hose back on. Okay, so before we get carried away, I'm going to go ahead and cut off this section. Let's do this next. I like to do these as I go so that I don't have to worry about everything when I'm putting it back together. When I put stuff back together, I don't like to fight trying to get this other stuff done. So for me, it's better to just go ahead, do this now while I'm here. And I'm trying to cut as close as I can to where it's bad so that I don't waste a bunch of hose. So if I make a deep cut somewhere, I can wind up cutting off a bunch of hose that I actually want to keep. So now that I've trimmed that off, what I can do, is just go ahead and slide this onto the old one and make sure that that's going to fit and it's not too tight. So this should work. Trimming this off, it seems a little bit tight, but the clamp will work good to hold that on there. And the new clamp that we put on here will actually hold better now that we've trimmed this off, because this is all, like I said, we would have to squish this so much to get it to seal that it may not seal without trimming it off. So just to let you guys know, we have got a producer now on the channel that monitors the chats. If you guys want to ask your questions, go ahead, and my editor and producer will get those to me, and I can answer those questions for you guys as we go. So next, we're going to go for the bolts that hold this housing on. Pretty easy to get to. 3 bolts. We're going to take all 3 of them off. We're going to leave the hose connected. The hose that's underneath there goes back to the heater core. We should have enough hose that we can snake it up through here. And when we do that, try to reposition you guys here a little bit so you can see a little bit better. When we bring this up, I'm going to snake it through around the throttle body, and then we're going to do all of our trimming, reconnect the hose to the new piece before we put the new one on. I don't want to do this the other way around by bolting it up and then trying to put the hoses on it. That bottom hose is a pain to get to, so it's better to just take the bolts loose and then tackle it. Anytime you can get more access when removing hoses, the better you're going to be. And the reason for that is oftentimes it's a tight area. So in tight areas where those hoses are, if you got room that you can move that all around and trim it off, that's the better way to go. Trying to get the right extensions here before I dive in here. So on some of this stuff, there is torque specs. I don't get too upset with the torque specs on this, especially since we're putting an aluminum piece on it. To me, I want to make sure it's tight and it's not going to come loose. So to me, as long as it's nice and tight and I'm not stripping it out, that's what I aim for. Okay, so this one, the bolts are actually fixed into the housing. The new aluminum one does not have bolts fixed into the housing. So you might risk dropping a bolt. So be careful when putting the new one back together. So we had one up on the top side of this housing up here. We got 2 more underneath. So now we got 1 more in front, or I should say behind the filter. There's 1 more bolt here, which is also in front of the sensor. Okay, we have 1 sensor wire that we have to disconnect right here. that sensor wire has to get disconnected. And as long as there's enough room for us to pull it up, we will. Figured that. So I will explain what happened here in just a little bit. So when I drained the coolant, apparently there was a block somewhere in here, and it did not allow everything to be drained out. Very frustrating, but it's not the end of the world. We'll just have some wiping up to do when we're done. Okay, here's our connector. On our connector, there's a little piece right here that we have to press in, then we can pull this connector up. If that little piece breaks, we are having to put a new connector on it. This one is a 2-wire connector. This is for your temp sensor. That has to work on newer vehicles. Without the temp sensor working, it actually messes with fuel mileage and causes a whole slug of problems. So we need to make sure that we take care of that and we don't break that. Okay, so I'm going to snake this underneath the connector and the other connector for this O2 sensor. Then we're going to pull our hose back for our intake and fish this up. Now you might be asking, why did I take the time to fish this up? Because now it makes it a lot easier to get at this clamp right here. That's what we're going after. That clamp is going to make all the difference. And as long as it is friendly, we will be able to use our pliers. So you know what, we're going to go ahead and use the tool because I can have better access this way, and by putting the pliers on it, I'm trying to hold and pull too many different things. I'll be able to put that tool on there, squeeze that, and then that can just sit there. And I won't need to try to hold the pliers, pull, and twist that hose at the same time. So our lovely tool right here. Again, thank you guys for tuning in on this Saturday. Every Saturday we go live at 1 p.m. Central Time. Every week is a new topic. Today's is on coolant leaks. This happens to be a Buick 1.4 liter, very common engine among the GM brand of vehicles. So pretty common that we're kind of doing this repair. So if you have a vehicle that has this 1.4 liter in it, this piece that I'm about to remove and put in my hand is a piece that you might have to replace on yours. And the reason that we replace this piece is for two reasons. This sensor goes out or starts leaking. This piece starts leaking up here. And that's exactly what's happened with this one. Angry Bird Mode, nice to have you here in the chat. So you work for Nissan, so you see a lot of different stuff, and you could probably comment on some of the issues that are going on right now with Nissan and them looking for investors. That's something I'll probably bring up in the news section here at the end of this video, but we're going to go ahead and finish getting this one put back together. But yeah, this is where we had a leak. And it wasn't up here. It wasn't up here that it was leaking. It was down in here. So it was seeping through this seal. We can't just reseal these plastics like this when they get heat soaked like this. After 100,000 miles, this thing becomes so heat soaked that oftentimes with a little bit of pressure, you can actually snap these because they become so brittle. It doesn't pay to put stock plastic back in it. That's why we're upgrading to the aluminum. So we're also going to clean the seal off of the block and clean up the block before we get too carried away. So you ask what the block side looks like. Well, on most newer vehicles, they use a rubber seal like this. This was stuck to the side of the head, meaning that this was glued tight to the head from being torqued onto the vehicle. That's a good thing because then it shows that it doesn't leak. The bad thing is now we have to clean that up really well. Oftentimes I will use a little bit of emery cloth or even light grit sandpaper to clean that up. Any debris caught between that gasket and the head will create a leak. If you were going to use silicone at this point, what you would want to do is make sure you don't have coolant running out where that silicone is going to go. Because if you have any silicone that you're using, coolant will actually disrupt the silicone as it's curing, and it'll cause bigger problems. So when we do this, oftentimes people will use an old school trick. I don't recommend this, but I'm sure some older people in the chat are going to tell me exactly what it is. But the old school trick is you put a little piece of breadcrumb, and we're not talking the outer crust of the bread, we're talking the actual like white, or if you use wheat bread, you would use the inside of the bread, the soft part, to absorb up the coolant so that the silicone will seal up. Now, the reason that they say that is they feel that it'll dissolve and won't plug the radiator. I've never been a fan of that. In fact, what I do is while I'm doing the cleanup like I am now, I would stick a paper towel right in here and just let it soak up any of the coolant. And then when I'm ready and I've already cleaned up that surface, I will pull it away and hopefully not have any coolant to deal with. But because it's a rubber seal that we're putting in there, I don't have to worry about that on this particular project. We're not using silicone here. Again, I'm not worried about getting this perfect at all. I'm just kind of cleaning up a little bit of the coolant that's spilled. That's only going to help me when I go to take this thing for a test drive. I won't smell coolant for a long period of time, but I'm still going to smell it, so I'm not going to waste a bunch of time today trying to do that. So what I'm grabbing now is something to scrape the surface where that gasket was. You can use something like this, or you can even use a wood awl. The problem with the wood awl is that's sharp enough it could scratch the block, and we don't want to do that, or the head. So we want to scrape off the contamination and make sure we have a clean surface to work with, but we don't want to actually gouge or cut the aluminum. So if you're going to use a wood awl, be extremely careful. Again, this is only to clean up that surface so that it'll seal. And then once I've done that, I will even run my finger across it or my nail and make sure that I don't have any rough edges there. Because if I have rough edges, I want to get those cleaned up now before I try to seal the new gasket down on it. Yes, it's rubber. Yes, it'll compress, but anything between it could cause that to leak. So cleaner the better. Okay, now that we've done that, I know that hose is long enough that we could trim that off and reuse the stock clamp. That is the route I want to go with that hose. So we're going to pull that hose up so it's more up in this area so we can work on it. And how I got to go about doing that is I need to slide this clamp off of the hose. I'm going to leave this attached to this one because I don't have to re-grab any other hoses at this point. All my hoses are off, and I'll just use this to reinstall. Okay, so I can feed this hose down, bring this up here. Now I have better access to trim this hose. And I don't want to trim a lot because I don't want to have issues putting this all back together, but I do want to get where it's compressed here. I want to get this trimmed off. Now, you might only get away with this trick once or twice before you have to put new hoses on it. And if you're going through this much work, it doesn't hurt to put new hoses on it if you have the time and money. I'm trying to save my customer a little bit of money versus replacing every single hose that's attached to this piece. Some hoses came in the kit, and we're definitely using the new hoses. But I'm not going to replace all of the hoses. Especially if I can trim them off and they will not get in the way or slide off. Then I'll go the route of just trimming them down so that the new hose clamps fit like they're supposed to, or the old ones might even. And that's some of it here is we're actually going to be reusing a lot of our old hose clamps. Yeah, be careful when you're cutting, guys. Some of these are a little harder to cut because you got to kind of put your hand in weird positions to be able to get the knife to cut. And sometimes if the blade is dull, it's better to switch it out than trying to cut it with a dull knife. Because if you slip off, like where my hand is, if I slipped off hard enough, I might nick my hand. And even a dull blade will cut flesh quickly. Okay, so I will have to find that where that dropped. I don't want that on top of the exhaust. But here it is, trimmed off. We'll slide the heat shield back a little bit, giving us a little bit more room. And we can go ahead and slide our clamp back on, because now we're getting ready to install the new piece. So, okay, we got it down far enough. Okay, here's our shiny aluminum one piece. This is a huge upgrade to this car. If I had to buy a new vehicle and I was choosing either, well, anything with the 1.4 liter, this would be an upgrade I would do, especially if I already had leaks. And this upgrade would make a huge difference in the overall performance and longevity of my coolant system. So this one is on here now. Hose clamp is seated. I will check to make sure I'm fully seated with the hose clamp. If not, now would be the time to use pliers or something to kind of wiggle it down, get it perfectly where I want it. But it feels like it's right where I need it to be. So there's one issue that I just noticed that I just did. Can you guys spot it out? To give you guys just a little bit, can you spot where I made this mistake? Give you guys a little bit in the chat here. What did I just do that because I moved a hose, now I got to take this back apart? Okay, so what happened was I put this hose on here, but this hose here has to be underneath this wire harness. I can't move this down here where it belongs if I'm stuck up above this hose. This is a good lesson for you guys if you're doing your repairs, to kind of watch what you do when you take things apart, because you could easily miss something like this and then you have to take it back apart because you have to move it. So I even have to go as far as taking the clamp off, because I have to move this hose back underneath the wire harness. I can't get this down where it needs to be if it's up above this wire harness. So and you might be asking, well, why did you have to bring it up there? Because we had to cut it off. Otherwise this hose clamp was not going to hold. So now I'm going to fish our hose clamp on here. Okay. Now I can stuff this onto there and then get my hose clamp on. Okay. So there we go. Now it's back on. Now I have to fish this down below. And how I have to do that is we have to move our intake tube again right here, this big one. This has to get moved out of the way so we can push this down into place. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and fish my intake tube back down and over out of the way. Then I can feed underneath my wire harnesses here and then run my bolts in. So on some of these repair guys, I wind up going over an hour. I try to keep my podcasts closer to an hour, or my lives. Sometimes that doesn't work, and I don't want to leave you guys half stranded in a project, and I can't leave it apart until next week. So oftentimes we push through and try to finish up the project, and then we just do a shorter wrap up at the end. But I got to get my O2 sensor and my connector for my temp sensor on the other side of this hose. or this bracket. Okay, so I'm just trying to line everything up, double checking to make sure that everything fits properly. Then I'm going to come over and grab my brand new bolts that came in the kit. So, if it comes with new hardware, we always want to use the new hardware. Now, I could have opened this bag by the zip tie. I decided just to tear it open. I'm not saving this bag for anything. But if you're one of those people that like to save every bag you get, then you could do that. So here is where I need to be careful. Like I said, we could drop those bolts down in there, and I don't want to do that. So I'm trying to find a spot in the hood to stick my magnet for my light. Okay. This one requires a special socket. This is a star one. And you do have to have these in order to put those bolts in it. If you didn't have that special socket, what you'd have to do is try to pull your old ones out. And oftentimes the old ones do not want to come out very well. So for me, I have the socket. You want to try to walk these bolts down evenly. You don't want uneven pressure. Uneven pressure could cause it to where it could leak. So taking the time to make sure that you get these where they need to be is pretty important. I normally like to use quarter drive ratchets anytime I deal with small housings like that, but this one, I only have this socket in a 3/8, so I have to switch to the 3/8 at this point. But I have to know how hard I'm actually putting pressure down on the bolts, so I don't want to over torque these. what I'm doing now is just kind of doing this all by hand, getting it down as close as I can before I start putting the ratchet on it. That's just to kind of get everything where I need it. Now, I'm noticing a problem. I'm going to try to get you guys in to show you guys what this problem is. You're going to run into this from time to time, especially on newer engines that are designed this way. So, I don't know if you guys can see it, but right here is my hose clamp. This is off of that coolant line. Here's my throttle body. My hose has to go on here. Right now that clamp would cut into the hose. I need to slide that clamp down and out of the way. This happens from time to time on newer vehicles because everything is designed so tightly. Okay, I'm going to grab a screwdriver. It'll be a lot easier to spin that. Thank you guys for tuning in on this Saturday. We do this every Saturday at 1 p.m. Central. Each week is a new topic. So we're going to slide this clamp right there. Got my screwdrivers on. We're going to slide this clamp so it's not in the way of that hose. We don't want that clamp to rub on the hose for the intake. And I'll explain to you guys why and what sensors are affected if you don't fix that. So we want to make sure that we have a clear shot to the throttle body. Right now it's still sticking up, so I need to go more. I actually might have to rotate this one almost all the way down. So let me see if I can get you guys in a nice stationary position to see what I'm doing here. There we go. Okay, so I need to get that clamp down to where it's not going to be in the way of the throttle body. Okay, just like that. All I had to do was push right here down on this and it slid around. What that did was give me room to now slide my tube on right here, this one, onto my throttle body. Next, we're going to go ahead and torque up those 3 bolts that are holding this on. And we're not going to want to get carried away here. We're going to take it nice and easy. Just because this is aluminum, yes, we could tighten it up a little tighter, but we don't want to get too carried away and strip out any of where the bolts go in the head. So right now it's just we want to get it down, and then we'll snug it tight. So that one's down. Again, everybody, this is a 1.4 liter, and this is normally a plastic housing that we're replacing. I've chosen to do the metal upgrade, and that's one thing I do differently, guys, with this channel. If I find upgrade parts, I bring them to you guys on the channel, because the upgrades oftentimes add longevity, not only to the engine, but also to other components that you may have on the vehicle. So having that upgrade really does make a difference in the long run of the vehicle, especially if it's one you're going to keep for a while. Okay, let's snug to that one. Next, we're going to do this one. Okay, one more to go. Here we go. All right, so that is on there nice and tight, not going anywhere. I can almost shake the motor because it's on there snug enough. Okay, so next, I'm going to move you guys here so you guys can see what's going on. Give me a second. I need to check in with my producer. Give me a second, guys. Is the feedback better, or is it still bad? I know my producer's on, so please let me know if the feedback is all right, or if you want to switch it to a different channel on our radios. Okay. This is for my producer only, guys. Hit the menu button, producer, and then scroll down 2 channels. Let me know when you're on there. All right, sounds good. I got my producer back, guys. Awesome. So next we're going to reconnect our wire here. Producer, please let me know if the talking has gone away. Okay. So there we go. We've got our wire connected. This one is a pretty easy one to connect. It's right down here. This is for the temp sensor. So right there, that little guy just snaps right into place. You'll hear it click in, which is what you want. So next we're going to start reconnecting hoses. And as we reconnect, we will be installing a few new ones. Definitely got to get a different tripod set up, guys, for doing engine work here. This will be something I'm going to be looking at as far as an investment for the future for the channel, is a better pod setup here. So I got something better to hold the camera. Okay. Now we can slide this on, but we're going to want to get our hose clamp first. Before we get that carried away, we have to remove this hose right here. This one, we get a brand new one in the kit. So we don't want to reuse this one. This one's almost squished flat, which is not a good sign. That means that the hose is going bad. Plus, it's better to have the new hose, especially if it comes in the kit. So anytime we get new parts in a kit, it's better to use the new parts. Okay, I didn't hear from my producer if that changing the channel worked or not, but I'll assume by not hearing anything, it's good. Okay. Okay. All right, so now that I got that clamp off, we have to break the seal on this hose. And it's on a metal hose, so we have to be really careful here. We do not want to break that metal hose, but we need that rubber hose to let loose. One trick that we can use is to use the simple pliers and twist the hose. So simple pliers, we twist this hose. What this does is breaks the seal of the rubber on that metal hose. If this was plastic, you'd have to be even more careful, but Usually on metal, all you need to do is be able to wiggle it back and forth a few times, and it'll pull right off, just like that. So we're not reusing any of these clamps. Now, if these clamps aren't rusty, I will take these clamps off this hose, but I will not reuse this hose for anything. When hoses get this bad, they're garbage. We don't reuse hoses that are in this kind of shape. And the new one comes with new clamps, so I'm not worried about reusing the clamps either. I'm just hanging on to the clamps. Because if I ever get in a situation where I have that size of hose, it's nice to have a few of those clamps on hand. Because like I said, they leak. And when the hoses start leaking, sometimes you'll pull them, and it's nice to have a clamp that you can replace it with. And oftentimes it works better when you do it that way. So I'm going to go ahead and slide these clamps on there. And what I'm actually going to do is try to line this up first. And just see, sometimes these come a little bit long. So sometimes you have to cut them. Other times you might have them in the wrong direction and you just need to flip them around like that. So that's how that hose is going to go. Had I tried to put this on the other way, I would have noticed a problem. So it's kind of good that I'm doing it this way because it allows me to kind of go at my own pace and make sure I get the hoses in the right direction. Now, the hardest one to put on is the one down here. This one is going to be the toughest to install. I usually wipe it a little bit, make sure there's no crud on it. I will seat the bottom one first. Okay, so the bottom one is seated. Next, I will try to do the top one here. Okay. So now this is on there. I have to get these clamps on there. And for this one, I will try to use our needle nose pliers. Okay, I'm putting these where I can easily access them. If I needed to move them, like if they weren't on in the right spot, I could easily shift them and move them to where they'll hold tight. And if I don't like, if they're too close to that outer bulge that holds a hose tight, I can always loosen it up, slide the clamp in a little bit, just like that. So next, I want to do this hose. This one, the reason I did this way is I wanted to make sure that when I put this worm gear one on, because we're going to use the worm gear, I'm not going to use one of the other styles. I want as much installed as possible so I know where to tighten this up and where I can get my socket and ratchet down to crank it tight even after it's ran. And if I put this in the wrong spot, I will not be able to access this worm clamp. So I'm using an 8mm socket to tighten up my worm clamp. Now this one I got to go pretty tight with so it doesn't leak, but I don't want to strip that worm clamp over. Now you will have to heat cycle this engine one time, meaning you'll have to get it hot, let it cool down, come back and retighten it. That's why the worm clamps aren't necessarily the best setup. So if you can go with the spring-loaded styles, these are honestly your better way to go. But if you need to worm clamp it, make sure you use a socket and ratchet to tighten this so that you don't have leaks. And remember, you do need to heat cycle it one time. I went through here because with the reservoir on, I'll still be able to access even if my intake tube is in the way, which is why I did it that way. Okay, so now we're going to get this intake tube on. And this also has a specific spot that it sits in. And that, I believe, is also going to be the 8mm, 8 or 7. 7. So that one is a 7mm on the throttle body. Again, we noticed oil inside this. So for the future, I'm going to be paying attention to this. This vehicle will be coming back for some exhaust work and to get a throttle body cleaning. When I do that throttle body cleaning, I'm going to be checking for an excessive amount of oil in there. If there is, I'm going to start tearing backwards towards the turbo because I want to know where the oil is coming in from and what I have to do to stop it. The worst thing about getting oil, and especially an excessive amount, is it can cause problems in the engine as far as misfiring and causing a whole bunch of bad stuff to happen. So that being said, we are going to be looking at that the next time this vehicle comes back. The customer had to do all of this stuff in steps. So you guys saw the steps last week for this. You guys are seeing the steps this week for the coolant leak. This makes this vehicle drivable for our customer. And ultimately, that's what we aim for, is to get the vehicles back driving for the customers. We don't want to have it to where the vehicles sit apart or tore down for long periods of time. And the main focus with that is staying diligent about your repairs, staying on top of small leaks when they happen, and being proactive with your maintenance. One way to stay proactive with your maintenance is replacing your battery. It's not something that's talked about very often, but I do want to touch on it. Most batteries nowadays will only last about 5 years. After 5 years, your battery starts deteriorating. That deterioration causes you to replace a battery. As you guys see, this battery is brand new. We just got this battery in this car. The old one was 5 years old. The cold cranking amps were way down, and it was even at, when you tested it, suggesting to replace the battery. We went ahead and replaced the battery. That was part of last week's video. But I will cover it real quickly. So we had a 10mm here, 10mm underneath this cap, a 13mm down there, and this bracket lifted up and unhooked from back here. There's a little tab back here that it clips into. So we were able to lift this up, pull this out, and then we lifted the battery out and put the new one in it. Very simple repair. Make sure you guys hit that like button and the subscribe buttons. It really does help the channel. We are trying to grow big time this year. We are looking into a lot of new stuff to bring you guys for this new year. So we need the channel to grow quite a bit, so please support us. All right, next is our reservoir bottle. And yes, we got a brand new reservoir bottle right here. Nice, shiny, new. No crud on the inside of this, not stained from the coolant yet. So, in order to do this, we're going to lift this piece up, slide our bottle down in place, and line up where our bolt holes are. We do have to lift our shield. Now, you could take yours off. I chose not to take it off because it was actually easier just to lift this up and snake my fingers in, and run the bolts on it like this. So I didn't really want to take the time to take this plastic piece off that you guys see in my hand. When we go to fill this with coolant, we're going to fill it as much as we can. Then we're going to lower this vehicle down off the ramps before we try to completely bleed out the system. Okay, these are going to be a 10mm bolt. So again, we don't need to get super carried away with these bolts. We're snugging them down, trying not to lose my socket in the process. Okay, just like that. Now our tank is mounted. We have two hoses to put on. One will be a brand new hose that I'm going to tear out of the bag right now. And the other one is going to be the one that attaches to the engine. So, I'll back you guys up so you can get a better view of what we're about to do. There we go. That's a better view. So here is our hose. This end clips in down here. This other end goes into there. And this one seems to be a little long, so I may choose to shorten this up. There is a rubber seal. So I don't want to get too carried away and just slam this in there and tear this rubber seal, or we're going to have a leak there. So I will put a very small dab of WD on that seal. And when I mean small, I mean tiny. It's just enough to slide in without tearing the seal. So barely any liquid at all. So what I'm doing now before I put this on there is I'm trying to see what direction I want the hose to go. And what I could do is grab my old hose. And that's honestly the best way to do this, is to look at my old hose right here. This tells me what I need off of this. So apparently this is going to be super long, and this might not even be the proper hose for this vehicle. It doesn't mean that we can't make it work. So I can come up here and I can trim all of this off, and then everything just kind of gets stuffed down. But actually, now that I look at it, that's a different hose. Where is... No, that is the right one. So the old style, this piece went up and over, and then it clipped on from the side. This one's coming straight in from the top. So yes, I do have quite a bit of hose I have to trim off here. Unless they went and glued this connector on there. Yeah, that's what they did. So here's what they're trying to do, is a setup like this. I don't like this because it goes up. You could create an air pocket up here. I want this down farther. And in order to do that, I might even go with a setup similar to something like this, where I trim it back here and we connect it here. That way it's a downward flow into our housing. In order to do that, they glued this one on here. So I'm going to need to remove that off so that I can trim this hose down. When you buy online kits, this happens. Sometimes they're kits that are designed for multiple different vehicles. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that sometimes your vehicle might require some modification. Okay, so when I took that off, obviously they glued this on there. So what we're going to do is toss this clamp, and we're going to use one of the factory ones that I took off, rather than reusing that one that's got a chunk of hose on it. And we will be cutting that hose off. So I'm going to find the best one and pull that clamp off, and that's going to go on the new hose. In the process of chasing the best one, I sent it flying behind my toolbox. So now I'm going to chase it, guys. Give me just a second. And I definitely don't want to use the other one, because the other clamp is in really, really bad shape. Magnet tools are your guys' best friends. Oftentimes this will reach into places that you can't reach if you drop a bolt, a socket, or even a hose clamp. Okay, so before I cut this off, I'm going to actually slip this one on there because I want to trim this at the right spot. And if it's not clipped in, I could accidentally trim it too far. Okay. Okay. So I don't want to kink the hose, and I don't want to force it too hard. So I'm going to want to trim right about here. I'm going to grab my knife and I'm going to mark that, and then I'm going to cut that hose off right there. And I'm also going to put my new hose clamp on before I slide everything together. Okay, so I marked it. Now I can just slowly work my knife around. Try not to cut anything but the hose. Okay, so now that that's trimmed off, now I can put my hose clamp on. And this one I can just do with a flat pliers. I don't have to use the needle nose for this. Although if it snaps back and hits me in the finger again, I'm going to. Ouchie. Okay. So slide it on. Okay, a nice downward spiral into here. This is meant for overflow. And if we had this spot higher, it would try to force the fluid up before it would pour in. We want everything to be a nice even flow. We don't want to create pinch points where air could get trapped. So if we would have left that hose long, we could have potentially left a spot that would have trapped air. But now we fixed that. We've got, I believe, one more hose to go, guys, and then we're ready to start filling this with coolant and begin doing our flushing process. All right, if you guys got any questions, make sure you guys chat those in, and we'll be answering questions here pretty soon. All right, so this one we already trimmed off right here. Trim this one off, already slid this on. I'm gonna pinch this and pull this in. Trying to get you guys on a spot that you can see this, but apparently that's being a little bit more difficult. There we go. That's a good spot. All right, so this one I don't feel comfortable using the pliers for. I'm going to use the needle nose pliers instead. And the reason I use the needle nose is the longer jaws allow me to get better grip on it. Those short pliers jaws oftentimes will slip off, like you guys saw it happen, and it kind of snap you in the finger. Okay. Just like that, nice and tight. And I watched it kind of squeeze around there. This one will leak if it's not tight. This one here will leak if it's not tight. That one will leak if it's not tight, and so will that one. That's why I designed it, that I could put a socket down here and tighten that up. So this was all done with intent and purpose as we did this repair. We didn't go about this haphazard. We kind of knew the direction we were going. We knew what we were going to be using. And ultimately, we set ourselves up for success doing this repair. So before we go ahead and fill this, we're going to leave this out and we're going to fill right here. We want to get as much coolant in as we can before it starts leaking out down here, guys. It's underneath here, right above that radiator hose. So right above, almost right up underneath here is where this plug goes. This is the vent to bleed out all the air in the system. It's not perfect. It will get you really close, but you have to run the vehicle and run it with your heater on high to completely bleed this system out. If you don't bleed this out, like we said, you could burn up your head gasket. You could have an air pocket trapped in something where it overheats and cooks something that you don't want it to get too hot, such as a heater core. So making sure that you have no air pockets in here is super important. So I'm going to try this without spilling, but I can't promise anything. I'm kind of doing this backwards. So what I'm doing is I'm just slowly filling this up. Like I said, I know I lost at least 2.5 quarts, almost 3 of coolant that I caught in the pan. That does not cover the probably quart that spilled out when I removed the housing. The reason that that happens, guys, is coolant remains trapped within the head. And oftentimes just pulling the cap on the radiator and draining the radiator isn't enough to get everything out of the block. Plus, there might have been trapped coolant or trapped air pockets in this prior to us even starting this position, like doing this repair. So by us doing this, we're ensuring that our customer will get something that doesn't have air pockets in it because we're doing it right. I want to check to make sure I'm not leaking out of that. Nope, I'm not leaking out of there yet. So when I start leaking out of there, I'm going to have to get that cap put in it. It's still draining, so that's a good sign. By the vehicle being up on ramps, the radiator is actually one of the higher points now. So this might do a really good job of getting a lot of the air pockets out for us. It's not going to be a perfect, we're still going to have to run it. Okay, and this thing had some massive air pockets trapped in it because we've gone through a gallon of antifreeze already. So, kind of a big sign that this thing was already low on coolant prior to us starting this process. And now we're kind of fixing the problem. Okay, so we're getting liquid running out. I'm not going to let this run out all over the place. So I want to get this in there. As long as I can get my hand in there. Okay, I gotta move you guys. All right, I'm gonna set you guys down because this thing's just running out all over. I'll let you guys watch the mess that's happening. Okay, the fact that we got a good amount running out of there, that's a good sign. That means we're getting a lot of the air pockets out. We don't got them all, but we're getting a lot of them. When I test drive this, when I go to test drive this, I will definitely be getting a lot more of the coolant out, or the air out that's trapped within the coolant system. But we do want to tighten up that plug. So I'm going to get the socket for that, which is a 13 millimeter. And we're going to want our ratchet with our extensions. We'll go with this one. That'll work. Try to set you guys off over here so you kind of see what I'm doing. I don't like how shaky my camera transitions are, guys, so I will be looking into this in the future. Okay. Fortunately, there's not much light in there, and it's really tight to get in there in the first place. Yeah, it's that tight to get in there. Okay, let's set you guys up over here, actually. There we go. Guys, get your chats in now. Get your questions in. we're going to be answering questions here in a little bit, once I finish getting everything topped off here. So in order to do this one, you're going to need a 3-inch extension and a 1-inch extension on a 13mm socket. This will tighten up that plug that is used to bleed the air out. Thank you guys for all the engagement today. It's been awesome. Again, we do this every Saturday at 1 p.m. Central Time. Today I didn't have any of my mods in, but we did have our producer. So hats off to our producer who did an awesome job today. Don't want to over tighten that plug, because if you strip it out, then you're in big trouble. But I do want it in there tight enough that it isn't going to leak from the customer. And that looks good. Okay. So now I'm going to work at filling up this reservoir. Need to pour a little bit more in there. It's still a little low. Then we can go ahead and fire it up and back it down off the ramps. The reason we're going to back it off the ramps is we need to let the engine run and circulate. And that will help get the air pockets out. I usually do this with the cap off of the reservoir. The reason why is it allows the coolant to circulate. Once you put the cap on, it'll pressurize the system. Sometimes that pressurization will keep the air from coming out. So sometimes it's better to just kind of let it flow than it is to cap it off while you're trying to get the air out. Okay, reservoir is currently full, but I need to get this off the ramps. So, clean my hands up quick, and then we're going to back this off the ramps. We're getting very close to this thing being done. So one thing I hate doing is getting into a customer's car with greasy hands. I get it, engines are greasy, they're dirty, but if mechanics take the time to clean themselves up a little bit before they get in a customer's car, it really can make a difference on the quality and the level of work that they do. So if you ever take your car to a shop and you notice that the steering wheel is all greasy when you get it back, it's because the mechanics at that shop didn't care enough to clean up before they jumped in your car. Just a pro tip for you as far as judging the level of quality that you get from some shops. Not all shops are this way. Many shops have very good processes, but there are the few out there. So, again, it's worth taking the time to clean the grease off your hands before you jump in a customer's car and you start touching controls and steering wheel and everything else. This is a standard practice I do for all my customers. I don't jump in a vehicle when my hands are greasy. Okay, so we're going to leave the radiator cap off. We're going to start this up and back this off the ramps. I want this flat on the ground. The reason why is when it's flat on the ground, the heater running, it will start circulating the coolant. As it circulates the coolant, it will also help get trapped air bubbles out. Now, if I get everything down to where I want it, I can take that bleeder screw loose again, let it bleed out a little bit to make sure I don't have more trapped air in the system. But because I cracked it, with it elevated, that put that drain plug at the highest point that it could be, meaning that I shouldn't have trapped air there. But if I have trapped air in the head and it circulates through, it could wind up there. That's why we check that. So we'll go ahead and start this up and back it down. I also have an incredible mess to clean up on the floor when I'm done. All right, when I pulled that housing, you guys can see just how much coolant leaked out of that. So I do have to clean up my mess when this is all said and done, because this spot is not where I get to park, so I need to clean that up. And even if it wasn't, I really don't like having fluids laying around on the floor, but we will do this until I get the job done, then I'll clean up after. So what we're gonna do is keep an eye on this coolant as this warms up. This will slowly suck coolant out. You guys can start seeing it drop a little bit here. What this is doing is circulating the coolant through the engine. So as it's running, the water pump is pulling coolant through the engine and it's pulling out the air bubbles. It's pulling down from the reservoir bottle to fill that up in order to make sure we don't have air pockets. This is an important step if you're ever doing anything with your coolant system. It's an important step to turn your temps all the way up, turn off your air conditioner, and to put it on defrost. The reason we do that is so that we don't have issues with air pockets in the heater core. So I had a little bit of a connection issue because of my Wi-Fi, but I'm going to move you guys back here. I'm going to switch you guys back to my other tripod. So this is my normal tripod that I'm putting you guys on. I like this one better. It's more stable. All right, so the fan just kicked in. That's a good sign. We like it when the fan kicks in. That means that it's moving coolant around. It's doing what it's supposed to do. So I'm checking coolant, seeing where we're at. I'm also going to take a peek for leaks. Okay, so I'm currently going to put the radiator cap on this. I need to let this kind of bleed out. Corey Mary, good to have you in the chat. One of my mods here, guys. Thank you for coming in through. Today we're doing basically fixing 2 coolant leaks on this Buick Encore. I'll cover the topic here once we get a little bit further in. So I'll rehash this once we get past the initial running here. Okay, we just started getting a little bit of heat coming through the heater core. It's not perfect yet. I need to keep running this. The reason why is that if I don't run this and get the air pockets out, it's going to trap that air in the system. All right, we're getting a little bit of heat out of the heater. It's not where I like it yet, so this is it's something that will take a little bit of time, and I will probably deal with this off camera, because more than likely I'm going to have to take this vehicle out and drive it to truly bleed out the system. I'm going to have to really get it out, run it hard, get it kind of doing what it's supposed to be doing under a load to bleed it out. All right. All right, Corey, that was a very good point that you made. That's why you're a mod on this channel. That is something that you want to do, is you do want to take this out, run the vehicle, do a good test drive. Don't just assume that it's good and then go about your day. Because what can happen is you'll have trapped air. As that water pump works and circulates, what'll happen is it'll flush that around. And as the air comes out, it's going to pull that coolant down out of the reservoir, which is why you need that bottle to fill that back up when that happens. Usually one good, decent test drive of about 50 to 100 miles will get most of your trapped air out of the system. Again, we do want to pull that bleeder screw and make sure that we don't have a bunch of air hiding there. Because if that is, it can be trapped in the system. That's why that little bleeder screw is on the top of some of the radiators on newer cars. Without that bleeder screw there, it's clear that we're going to have bigger problems. So, good one, Corey. Thank you for that piece. That's why you are a mod on this channel. Again, guys, we do this every Saturday at 1 p.m. Central. And when we do this, we always do a physical demonstration or topic. Then we break into all of the news stuff. So what we're doing now is we're going to transition. If anyone's got any questions, you guys can chat those in now. Also, we're going to break into some of the news topics that I've seen. So throughout my week, I scan some of the popular news sites and kind of watch what's happening in the automotive world. Ford has done it again. Their new Broncos, the Badlander editions, are having issues with the rear axles falling out. And I'm noticing a bad internet connection, so I'm trying to get closer to my router, guys. Okay, hopefully that'll work a little bit better. So what's going on with the Badlander edition? Well, the Badlander edition is having a piece fall off of the rear axle. That piece is important to hold the rear axle into place. When it falls out, you have a risk of losing the rear axle. It's only on the Badlander editions, not on the Raptor, not on the base models. So Ford has yet another recall on their plate. Next, guys, we got some big news coming out of the Stellantis and Dodge world. Stellantis is choosing to dial back their EV, seeing that the US market isn't willing to buy into the EV. That means that they're bringing back the Hemi in 2026 in their half-ton edition pickups, and they're actually looking at adding a gas option to the brand new two-door Challenger. Now, will it be a gas option that's V8, or will it just be another six-cylinder? That we don't know. We'll have to wait and see. I do know that their turbocharged four-cylinder was supposed to be a gas option for that vehicle. Now, I'm hoping that they go to the V8 option versus the four-cylinder to make the car more fun. And the older styling of the car kind of makes it feel like it came from the era of the old school Challengers with the two doors. So if that's the case, that might be appealing to a lot of people, especially Dodge fans, if they haven't completely told Dodge to go away. That could happen. We do not know that yet. That is something to see. But again, a lot of this has been pushed out. What's brought about this change in Dodge? Well, here's the deal. What brought this about is they brought back the old CEO. They fired the CEO of Stellantis after he was so crazy about the EV and killing off the gas platform. They were almost going to start selling off brands, Chrysler, some of the other smaller stuff that wasn't doing well, including Dodge. The Ram was okay, but was dropping numbers quickly. Because without a gas V8 option in a half-ton truck, the American market does not want that vehicle. And unfortunately, that's where they kind of lost sight of what their customers wanted. So hopefully Dodge has learned their lesson, put the right CEO in place, and they're going to start moving forward. Bring back the Dakota. Yeah, a lot of people like the Dakotas. Colorados have been really popular. Rangers have been really popular. So it would be a good thing to bring that back. And I would tell them, don't bring it back as a 4-cylinder option like both Ford and Chevy did. Bring it back as a 6-cylinder or V8 option, and you will get more sales by doing that. Then again, we are just a small channel here, and if they are listening, which I doubt, maybe they are because I've ran them up the flagpole so much, maybe, just maybe, they will do something about it. Let's see. Donnie, what's up from Baton Rouge, Louisiana? Nice to have you here. Yeah, today's topic was fixing coolant leaks. I'm going to go ahead and just cover this quick. We had 2 coolant leaks on this Buick Encore. This is 2017 with a 1.4 liter. One issue that is a problem is the thermostat housing leaks. And when it starts leaking, you have to rip it out, redo it, and put everything back in. We chose to do an aluminum upgrade. Guys, you can check this out. If you watch this in replay, you'll see us putting in the aluminum housing with a couple of new hoses and trimming the old ones so that everything fits tight. We don't want to have coolant leaks in the future. So fixing this is really important. That being said, we also had to replace the reservoir. The reservoir return hose was cracked. And if it's going to return the coolant, we don't want it spilling out and not going back in the reservoir. It kind of defeats the purpose. So with this, we're definitely going to have to go test drive this after I do this video, after I wrap things up with you guys. I'm going to go take this for a pretty hefty test drive with a jug of coolant. And I'm going to watch my temp gauge real close. I got to let it kind of go up and down until it levels out where it's supposed to. When I bring it back, I'm also going to take that bleeder screw loose and make sure I don't have any air coming out of that bleeder screw, because any air coming out, it will cause a problem. So, Corey, the U.S. needs small trucks in it. Yes, Corey, I agree with you. That's why the Colorados have become so popular. That's why the Rangers are as popular as they are. Small trucks are more beneficial to the actual use and daily use of those vehicles for many people. So without having that category of truck, they're missing out on a huge market. What did you do to fix the leak? I missed the beginning. Okay, so let me grab the 2 pieces that are broke and I can kind of break this down a little bit better for you guys. All right, here's what we got, Corey. So this one here, this piece was broken. And when it returned the coolant, it wouldn't go into the reservoir. Oftentimes they'll break down here too, and they'll just keep leaking. Or you might have a bad cap and you got to replace the cap. But what really drew our attention, causing us to have to do this repair in the first place, was this little guy. This is the coolant thermostat housing. There is no thermostat, but we have a sensor here for the temp. We have this piece that allows us to basically direct our coolant flow back up to our reservoir. And because this sits lower than the radiator, it was leaking out of here. The seal in here has gone bad. The problem is this plastic deteriorates over time. So even if I would have taken this apart, put a new seal in it, put it back together, oftentimes these still leak. So the aluminum one that we put in looks exactly like this, only made of aluminum. And it is a lot better long-term than having the coolant leaks. And I would never advise using plastic junk like this when you have so much going through it. So hopefully that brings you up to speed, Corey. That's what today's was on. Manly trucks are good, but not everyone wants to spend $90K for a truck. Yeah, truck prices are ridiculous. It's insane what they're asking for even Colorados and Rangers. It's insane. And the GMC Canyon, don't even waste your money. It's the same as the Colorado, only with a much higher price tag because it's GMC. Oftentimes, GMC will test things there that will eventually wind up in the Colorado, but I don't like those test bed vehicles. Between GMC, Cadillac, even Buick, I don't like that those are the test beds for the Chevrolet side. So any new technology you see usually winds up in those models first, then filters down to the rest of the company. And that usually takes a year or two. The origami tailgate that everyone thought was cool at first, that wound up falling apart. It did make it to the Chevy eventually, but it didn't stay there very long. And that's because they started noticing the problems with the origami tailgates. Lovely plastic parts. My Ford was the same way. That was from Corey. Yep. Toyota is better. Yeah, actually, we have a Toyota on the channel. We have an 04 Toyota Tacoma, and it came to me through a family member who passed away. We've gone through and done a lot of work on it. This channel, you guys will see a lot of stuff from that Toyota on this channel, and I do a lot with it. Acons, I have two cars. One is a Datsun 100. One is a Toyota Hensey. Yeah, those, like I said, the Toyotas, for the most part, are pretty bulletproof. It's crazy what you can put a Toyota through. And when they design Toyotas, most people don't know this. Unlike the German cars, when they design Toyotas, they design them to be ran hard and not always hit your oil change intervals. Not the case with Volkswagens. If you get a Volkswagen or BMW or anything of that, the Lexus Toyota are designed to be ran through right to the ground. Not the same with the German engineered cars. If you miss your intervals, it is a huge deal. You don't hit your oil changes when you're supposed to. You don't change the plugs when you're supposed to. Everything is so crucial on a German engineered car because they literally design it down to the perfection. So they require you to do your maintenance. Not so much on the Toyota side. I've seen a lot of people run Toyotas 250,000 miles and never change a set of plugs. Me personally, I like saving fuel, so I will change my spark plugs. But the fact that they designed it to run on such wide tolerances means that it makes it more user-friendly long-term. But yeah, maintenance is always important. Let me get caught up here. Make sure I didn't miss anybody. Corey said they're also mid-size now, not true mini. Yeah, the mini trucks are pretty much gone. A lot of people just don't like those. Chevy Loves were fantastic for their time. Yeah, the Chevy Loves, to be honest with you, most people don't know this. Chevy Loves were still produced in Mexico for a very long time. I think almost until the early 2000s, they still designed and built Chevy Loves in Mexico. So anyone who wanted one would obviously go down to Mexico, pick up a brand new one, drive it across the border, and pay the tax. Again, bit extreme, but if you lived on a border state, it really wasn't hard to get your hands on one. Aim High said, anyone have a Buick? Like what was on the channel today. Aiken, do you know the Dodge Corvette 1973 V? I've seen them. I've been around them. I haven't turned very many wrenches on them. A lot of the older school stuff was before my time. But I did deal with a lot of stuff in the late 70s. So when I was growing up in the early 80s, I started turning wrenches in the early 90s. Some of that older 70s stuff was still around, including the 80s stuff. So I had a lot of chance to play around with a lot of that stuff. Corey, my mother-in-law has a Buick similar to this. Had the spark plugs done, intake seal, but no coolant issues. Yeah, Corey, pay attention to that because when it creeps up and it starts leaking, it happens quickly. And it just snowballs. If you don't catch it right away, it'll leak so bad, it'll start smoking out of the front of the vehicle. So that was a huge red flag to me that it had to be done. We've already done the coil packs, valve cover, gasket, and we did a valve cover upgrade, getting rid of the plastic valve cover. There is a spot in the valve cover that if it leaks oil in, it gets into the emission system, runs it through the turbo, fills up the intercooler with oil, and then spits it back into the engine. When I took this apart today, I saw a decent amount of oil in the bottom of the throttle body. This is concerning for the future going forward with this vehicle. This vehicle will be coming back in about 2 months to get some exhaust work done. When it comes back, I'm going to check that throttle body because we have to pull it and clean it. If I notice a tremendous amount of oil in there again, I'm going to start tearing everything apart backwards to that turbo. If the turbo is leaking oil into the turbo and then running it through the system, that means the turbo shot. 1.4s are turbocharged engines. Doesn't matter which ones you got. A 1.4 is a turbocharger. Aiken said the Dodge Corvette 73 is my favorite car. Yeah, they had really good looks of cars back in the early 70s. Challengers, Chargers, Coolant. They all had really good styling and they were built strong. Cars nowadays, they're mainly plastic. And to be honest with you, half the time the plastic breaks when you take them apart, especially if they're more than 10 years old. So kind of the downfall of the modern automotive industry. Do you know the vehicle called Broadway? I don't think I know exactly what you're talking about. I've seen something similar to it, but I don't know if that's what it is for sure. The pictures are not ringing in my head on what it looks like. I've seen a lot of them that look like that weird style, almost like a Phantom. I'm not quite sure if that's what you're talking about. For some reason, the Phantom look is popping in my head. Aim High said, sounds like your mother-in-law had one of the good ones, Corey. Out of that, you took such good care of it. Yeah, guys, maintenance is key. It doesn't matter what we do. If we don't do good maintenance, the vehicles aren't going to last. I took a car that normally only gets 28 miles to the gallon, and I'm getting 31 with it. Why? I took the time to do the maintenance, and the maintenance was pulling the coil packs, putting new coil packs in it, and we threw E3 spark plugs in this. So we got about 3 more miles to the gallon out of E3 spark plugs. I can say I'm a fan. You don't notice it when you're driving it. It doesn't feel like it has a bunch more torque. It does seem to run pretty smooth, but I did notice on the fuel mileage, big time. Corey, there was some oil in the Buick intake, but no turbo. Has the V6. Yeah, if you have the V6, you don't have the turbo. What you're seeing in that oil then is there should be a hose that goes from the intake to the throttle body. that hose is where it's sucking the oil out of the valve cover. Oftentimes you could take and do a valve cover bypass if you don't live in an emission state. So if you don't have to worry about emissions, you can do the bypass, put a filter on the valve cover side and cap off the intake side. You don't want to leave the intake open because it will be after the mass airflow sensor. If it's after mass airflow, that whole system has to be sealed. If it sucks any air after the mass airflow sensor, it throws off your readings and gives you a check engine light. You won't get a check engine light by doing the valve cover bypass, but you'll also notice you don't use oil with that. The alternative is doing an oil catch can, but you got to remember to dump the oil catch can. Renault Broadway stock car. Yeah, no, I do not know of that car right off the top of my head. It's something I will try to look up. I know Renault is trying to do a lot of different stuff. So I mean, it would be interesting to kind of see what they got cooking there. Joy, hello. How to fix an 07 Volkswagen Turbo T5 or cylinder 2 misfire? Okay, so if you have a specific cylinder that's misfiring constantly, you have to point it down to what is causing that cylinder to misfire. Let's go ahead and run through some scenarios that will allow you to diagnose what's going on. Number one, you could try unplugging the coil pack. If you notice that the vehicle doesn't change and it's a consistent misfire, you could point it towards the coil pack, not sending spark through the coil pack, meaning you got a bad coil pack. Next, you could have a spark plug that's fouled out, or maybe the plug is bad and it's not able to spark. A cracked plug from the outside might actually cause it to not spark properly or ignite the cylinder. Next, you could have an issue inside the cylinder itself. Either a valve not closing, piston rings gone bad, no compression there. And a quick way to check on compression, take your oil cap off. If you're noticing a tremendous amount of blow-by, that's usually a sign that you've got bad piston rings and you're losing that compression from the cylinder and it's going down into the oil pan. If you notice that you're burning and consuming more oil, that's another good sign that you have internal issues with the engine. We're dealing with that with our Kia Soul. Champagne Bubbles is got a hurt motor. As much as they don't want to tell us that it is, I know it is. I can hear it ticking when it starts when it's cold. And it's starting to almost become a thump, not a tick. And when it gets into the thump category, that's usually a sign that the piston rings are starting to go bad. And we're using a lot more oil. All right. So, does it make sense to install a 2JZ turbo into a BMW E36? In order for me to answer that, I would need to do a lot more research on that, because you need to look at, are you trying to just bolt that to the engine? So are you trying to bolt it to the E36 engine that's in there, or are you looking at doing a full swap to a 2JZ? If you're going to do a full swap, it should work as long as you get your wiring right. But you got to get the wiring right. If you mess up the wiring at all and you don't get everything connected properly, it's not going to run right. A lot of work to do that. It's a crazy, insane project that most people don't tackle when you start doing those kind of conversions. If you're just looking at bolting the turbo from a 2JZ onto the BMW E36, you're going to need to make sure that engine can withstand the turbocharger. Some engines don't like being turbocharged because they're really high compression. If they've got really high compression and you bolt a turbo to it, you can blow the head gaskets out of it or possibly wreck piston rings. So A lot of homework needs to be done for me to answer that question properly, and I need to know exactly what direction you're trying to go there. Corey, could be a coil pack. Yep, exactly. Spark plug or cylinder damage. Yep, exactly. So that would have been for Joy on that one. I'll give you guys a little bit more time to chat some stuff in. Joy says, thank you so much for the information. Yeah, start with the coil pack. That's going to be the easiest. Just simply unplug it, see if nothing changes. If nothing changes on that cylinder, pull the coil pack and pull that spark plug out. Inspect the spark plug. I'm going to guess if it's not sparking, that spark plug is going to be full of fuel. You can't reuse that spark plug because it's fouled out, meaning that it's so soaked in gasoline that it's not going to run right. So you're going to have to put a new plug in that cylinder for sure, and you might have to put a new coil pack in. You can also do what they call a compression test if you're worried about the cylinder being hurt. All you do is take a hose that threads down into the head where the spark plug goes. There's a gauge on it. You just have somebody turn the vehicle over. You don't want it to start. Just turn the vehicle over, and it'll build pressure in the cylinder. If you're anything down below, I would say 90 psi on that cylinder, your cylinder's hurt, meaning that something in there is damaged. It's not sealing the cylinder, and no matter what you do, you're going to have a misfire there. Oftentimes, we've taken vehicles apart, pulled the plugs out, done a compression test, and we notice that a cylinder's at 50 psi. That means we've got major problems internally in the engine, either bad piston, bent valve, or anything like that. That's a common sign that timing has jumped and it's smashed. So if you have that issue and that's what the misfire is, I guess how long have you had the car and have you ever had to do the timing in it? If you just had timing done in it and now it's not firing on cylinder number 2, that gives me more information to play with, meaning that there's a chance that you didn't get to the timing soon enough and it damaged that cylinder. So those are things to definitely look at, guys. And anytime you're doing anything with timing, it has to be perfect. You have to take your time. And what I always suggest, once you put all your timing back together, whether it's a belt or a chain, you take a wrench and you hand turn over with a ratchet socket or a long, if you got a wrench that works, you could use a wrench, whatever, but slowly turn that engine over by hand. And if there's any spot where it doesn't want to go, don't force it, because the minute you force it, you bend the valves. But always turn it over twice, 2 rotations of the engine by hand. This way you know the valves aren't going to hit. Now, if you're turning it over and all of a sudden it just boonk, then stop, because that means the timing's off. So you'll have to back everything up, get your timing mark straight. And when it comes to timing, guys, usually if something jumps, I don't work on them, because the chances are the engine's shot. Most engines nowadays are what they call high interference engines, meaning that if the timing jumps, the motor's toast. That's the way they work. If the timing hasn't jumped and you know you're good and you're getting to it at the proper maintenance, then you want to make sure that all your marks are lined up before you take anything apart. Make sure everything is perfect, so that when you pull the belt and put the new one on it and put the tensioner on it, you're good to go. That's the only way to do timing. I have a 1.4 liter carbureted engine. When I started it in cold weather, the engine consistently stops. How can I solve this? All right, so on a carbureted vehicle, oftentimes you need a choke. That choke is designed to basically restrict the amount of cold air getting sucked through the engine, because if you suck too much air, it's going to die on you, especially in cold weather, because the cold air is a lot more denser, meaning it needs a lot more fuel. Well, on a cold idle start, it's not going to work that way. It can't put enough fuel down through the carburetor to compensate for the lower temperatures outside. That's what the choke is for. So you're able to choke the throttle on the carburetor so that you get the right flow of air and fuel. That's what the choke is for. Some vehicles run what they call an electronic choke. This was very common in the late 80s. Electronic chokes were wired up to either a key hot or ignition hot, and what it would do is the minute you keyed it on, you pump your gas twice, fire it up, and the choke would slowly open because it was all like a heated coil. And as it went, it would slowly heat up the coil, pulling the choke open. And once the choke was fully open, your vehicle should be warm enough to run on its own. So at that point, I would look at your carburetor. You might need to do a carburetor rebuild. You might need to rebuild the choke or fix that choke setup. Corey said it's toast. Yeah, if it jumps, it's toast. No way about it. Doesn't matter what brand, what make, what model. If it jumps, most engines nowadays are high interference, meaning high compression. And the piston is going to kiss the valve. And when it does, it's done. Corey says, gotta go, have a good one. Keep the greasy side down. Thank you, Corey, for checking in. This has been an awesome live, guys. We've been doing really good. Our new producer did excellent. I'm very happy with how we're doing this now. I like the flow. I like how we're doing this. It's working really well. Guys, I'm getting information in the background as far as when I'm working on the project and you guys chat in a question. That way I can still answer your question and I can check in as you guys come in and go. So that's been really beneficial here. Donzi says, how long have you been following Jesus? Not as long as I should have. Let me put it that way. I'll keep it at that. To be honest with you, I strayed away in my younger years, and it took me a while to come back. So I'm glad I did. It was something that was very important to me now, but at the time, I didn't necessarily choose to stay on the right path. And I would tell people, if you're straying back and forth and you don't know what to do, you got to take the time and just read. That reading makes all the difference. And the more you read, the more you learn, the more you understand, the more you grow. I would tell anyone, if you guys are searching for churches, do your homework. Not all churches are good. Not all churches are the same, and not all of them will follow what they're supposed to follow. That is a very important piece of tip that I can give you guys on stuff related to faith. Don Z says, I see cars like Tesla exploding, so I'm afraid to buy one. Okay, Teslas. Yeah, here's the issue with Teslas. Teslas are a fire hazard. Why? Simple, the batteries. And the older they get, the more wiring can wear through, which could cause a fire. This is why the EVs are dangerous on much older vehicles. As those vehicles age, there's a whole lot more to be worried about. And the other problem is that maintenance is extremely expensive on them. When you have to replace a battery in this thing, maybe $200 for the most expensive battery. Battery in an EV, $37,000, and that's for a cheap one. I've heard them going as high as 45 now. So yeah, you buy a vehicle for 90 on an EV, you put another 45,000 into it 8-10 years later, because it's going to make it till the end of the warranty, which is 8 years. So 8-10 years, you're putting a new battery in this EV, and you're spending half as much as what it would be to buy the car brand new. That's why their resales are dropping horribly. Nobody wants to buy a used Tesla. The reason why is that battery cost. Don Z, amen, brother. My wife brought me back, holds me accountable. Hey, I can relate. I really can. I really didn't turn my life back around until I met my wife, and she was a pastor's daughter. So yeah, I had some learning to do. Let me put it that way. It took me a while to get my feet on the ground and start moving in the right direction. And it really took me finding a great church that was going to have a men's group. to be honest with you, it's our job to lead. And when we don't lead properly, that's when things go wrong. And we can't lead properly if we're not educated properly. And that was the biggest piece that I had to put into place. It took me a long time to figure that out and get my head on straight. I'm glad that I did. It really has made a huge difference. Yep, I got you. I'll hold you accountable. Yeah, mine does too. If I start veering a little bit, she's quick to point it out, like, okay, what's wrong? Why aren't you in a good headspace? So yeah, we've had plenty of those conversations. Yep. Still are, unfortunately. I mean, it's life, things happen, but you should always try to progress and do better. And that's where I'm at, but yes. Danzy, what do you think about LADA? What is that? What is that? I guess I'm not too caught up on that. Yeah, I'm not too caught up on that. I'll give you a little bit of time here to respond. Probably going to start wrapping this up soon, guys. This has been a really good chat after the build. Again, guys, I brought you some of the news and stuff that has been going on. The automotive industry is going to start getting crazy in the next couple months because they're going to start gearing up to try to produce for this next season. I guess this is one of the other last pieces I can bring while I'm waiting for Donzi to kind of give us some more information on the LADAs. So what's going on is most dealerships are sitting on a huge stockpile of vehicles. They're having trouble selling, and a lot of them are sitting on 2024s yet. So because they're sitting on 2024s, the issue is coming around to where they're trying to give you an extensive amount of discounts to buy some of these newer cars. These discounts are not always what they appear to be. And whenever you're dealing with first model vehicles for a first year, I would lean away from them. Too many problems, too many complications. Again, first year models, bad. Too many bad things that can happen. I like the vehicle to be out for a few years, let all the bugs be worked out before I invest in it, but that's just me personally. Donzi, I had a bunch of them. Donzi, I'm wondering why your messages are getting restricted. That shouldn't be happening. Danzy, though, LADA, the Russian car. I haven't had much to do with Russian vehicles or Ukrainian vehicles or anything like that. Yeah. The Russian cars, for the most part, I haven't had a chance to deal with much of them. Here in the US, we don't really see them here, mainly because they're just not really imported here. So I don't get to see or put my hands on a lot of them. As far as anything that's imported here, for the most part, a lot of the stuff that's imported here is cars like your Toyotas, your Nissan, Lexus, BMWs, Mercedes, stuff like that. We don't see a whole lot from the rest of the world. Even Renault is kind of hard to see a lot of, just because they don't really bring a lot of them over here to the US. And they're not always available unless you're in a bigger city where you might run across a couple of them. So that one, I can't give you much information on that one. So, all right, guys, this has been a good one. Thank you guys for the chat here at the tail end. Guys, we do this live every Saturday at 1 p.m. Central. Now, next week, I won't be on. I won't have a topic for next week. I have an engagement that I have to be at for my family. It's important that I'm there. So there will be no live next Saturday. But we will be back the following Saturday with our topics. We'll be diving right back into it. More than likely, we're either going to be starting to tear apart Malibu steel on the deer hit, or if that one gets sold, I have something on Crimson Vortec that needs to be fixed. That one's going to be a very tough repair. Now, as you guys know, I've been fighting shoulder injury. I've had to really be careful what I do, how I do it, which way I move, so it's been frustrating for me, especially having to dial back what I do. But that being said, that one needs to be done on Crimson Vortec because it does involve the steering. Now, it will not affect alignment, but it does affect how the steering works, and I want it to be safe. So it does need to be fixed, and it will get fixed. It's just a matter of what time we're looking at it being fixed. Danzy says, I have a Buick M5. The car is very good, but it breaks down a lot. I was wondering if this is because it revs too much. So you might have missed the comment that I said when I was talking about Toyotas. The difference between a Toyota and a BMW or Volkswagen is how they're engineered. So European and German cars are designed to perfection, meaning you have to do your maintenance, you have to do everything accurate, including your oil changes, or you can damage the engine. Every maintenance item is super important on European and German cars. Toyotas, not so much. You can almost pour dirt into the engine on a Toyota and it'll run. I don't suggest it because it'll damage cams and bearings, but they really have designed their engines to be ran really roughly and not necessarily always hit your maintenance intervals. Not so much on the European and German side. Maintenance is super important and missing one could be catastrophic. Not so much on the Toyota side. Chevy is similar to that. You can miss maintenance intervals and it'll work. But yeah, that's what I got for today, guys. Thank you guys so much for all your support. Thank you for hitting that like button. Thank you for all of those who subscribed today. Thank you. And again, we will not be here next week, but we will return the following week with a brand new topic. I will post like I did early as soon as I can and let you guys know the topic. But as always, thank you guys for all your support. Continue hitting the like, subscribe buttons, and ringing that notification bell so you get notified when we go live, which is every Saturday at 1 p.m. Central Time. And I'll see you guys on the next one.